Today we have another Chopin Prelude. This will be number 4 from the set of 24, written by Frederick Chopin. Um, this one was in E minor, and Chopin's Preludes famous, and Chopin was when he wrote them, he was certainly well acquainted with the Preludes of Bach and the Preludes of Bach from the Well-Tempered Clavier. And Chopin, so much so that he arranged his preludes in order in some sense, like Bach did. Bach arranged his preludes in order of key rising chromatically, from A to A sharp, B, C, C sharp, and so forth. Chopin, though, put his in the order of the circle of fifths of tonalities. So you have C major is the first one, then you have A minor, which is the relative minor of C major. And then you go up a fifth from C major for number 3, which would be G. And then you go down to the relative minor of G for number 4, which is this one, which is E minor. And then they progress so forth like that. So he certainly paid respect to Bach, who he did respect a lot. He was not unacquainted with the older composers from the classical period, even though he was firmly in the Romantic period. But that being said, his preludes are not like Bach in one sense. The preludes in Bach, in Bach's time, prelude was something that was seen as what the word prelude means, which is an introduction. It's a prelude to something, to some other piece. And so his preludes reflect that to some degree, rather than being complete pieces, so to speak. But that's not true of Chopin. So Chopin's are quite different, one to the next to the next, and they stand alone, one to the next to the next. They're not introductions to something bigger at all, even though they're not long, but they certainly are not introductions in the classical sense. In some ways, Chopin, who came in the first half of the 19th century, was really the first to begin exploring the piano as an instrument, and the possibilities of the unique possibilities of the piano as an instrument, which really was starting to come into its own in the 19th century. Chopin is unusual in that he is really almost uniquely known for his solo piano work, because he didn't really have a big output for other instruments or ensembles. It's really rather small. Really hit the bulk of what he's done, and certainly what he's known for, is his stuff on the piano. The preludes being one group of things, but you had the mazurkas and the polonaises and so forth. So he had a rich piano repertoire in his catalog. He was a performer too. So although we can't know for sure, obviously, we can only go on what people tell us. We don't have recordings from that period. But we know from testimony, at least, that he had a reputation that he was probably one of the greatest and most refined pianists in history. Can't know that, of course, for sure, but certainly by reputation, that seems to be true, although he wasn't a muscular virtuoso like Franz Liszt was at that time. And Franz Liszt was somebody who admired Chopin greatly, but Chopin, on the contrary, didn't admire Liszt at all. He thought he was rather vulgar as an artist. Liszt was the kind of person who could certainly fill a stadium with the sound of the piano. He was robust in his ability and technical virtuosity. But Chopin, on the other hand, was a much more sensitive and quiet player. So he didn't play big venues. He played salons. But we know from testimony from people who heard Chopin play that some listeners of Chopin remarked that he would play so softly that they wanted to just go up to the piano and put their ear on it to hear what he was actually playing completely. Prelude number 4 in E minor is one of the most often played of the set, perhaps because it's not that difficult. It's not. I don't know if it's exactly the easiest one, but it certainly is easier than most of them in a technical sense to play. Certainly for me, it's easy, and most players play it even when they're in that sort of intermediate range of learning, whether they get farther or not. But usually, you start playing it somewhere in that between beginning and intermediate stage. It's highly chromatic, but relies on a pretty simple harmony. There's a lot of repetition in it. And so the real trick to playing it isn't the technical part. It really is to vary your playing to keep it interesting because it's a lot of repetition in the piece. And so keeping it interesting really is the trick. Being a relatively easy one to play, it's also one that you have probably heard in movies or TV shows. I know that it was featured in the film Five Easy Pieces. Jack Nicholson, I think, played it. It was featured in the film Fatal Attraction. It was featured in a Star Trek Next Generation episode. It was featured in the West Wing episode, among others. I'm sure there are others out there. So it's one of those things that sort of pops up in movies and TV. Perhaps because it's easy, perhaps because it just fits the mood. It's a bit on the somber, sad side. But anyways, so here is Chopin's Prelude number 4 in E minor.